China's ambassador to the United States posed a very simple question. Quote, is the United States ready or willing to live with another country with a very different culture, a very different political and economic system in peace, unquote? The answer to this question must be that despite the intentions of the US rulers, the people must opt for peace. For the Black liberation and anti-imperialist movement in the US, we are clear. War is a class issue. And we say not one drop of blood from the Black working class is poured to defend the capitalist oligarchy. It is important that this position is clear because the US state wants to disconnect the ongoing Black struggle for human rights, anti-colonialism, and authentic democracy in the US from the broader anti-colonial and revolutionary struggles and movements globally. The US state wants to project our movement as one concerned only with Black lives or winning civil rights or something called racial justice, which objectively is an impossibility for a white supremacist settler colonial state. This was the strategy of the US in the late 1940s when Africans in the US were in the forefront of agitation for a radical notion of human rights that centered democracy, racial justice, national and people's self-determination. The politics were often explicitly anti-capitalist, seeing that what we refer to today as racial capitalism as providing the material basis for white supremacist power. This, my friends, is the Black radical internationalist tradition and is the perspective that informs my positions on the question of China and a new Cold War. This Black internationalist perspective was captured in response by Nelson Mandela during his first visit to the US after he was released from prison in South Africa. When he was asked in what was supposed to be one of those got you questions about the support from the ANC and other South African liberation movements received from Cuba, Libya, and the PLO. His answer by saying that he said that the mistake that some make is assuming that their enemies should be our enemies. Our movement, the African radical anti-imperialist internationalist movement, sees the Chinese state and the Chinese people much differently than the US state and its ruling class. We center the collective human right of self-determination and national sovereignty for all peoples, nations, and states, and therefore take a position of resolute opposition to the effects or to the efforts by the US state to isolate, subvert, and militarily threaten the Chinese people and the Chinese government. We oppose the so-called pivot to Asia under the Obama administration and the designation of China along with Russia as global threats in the 2018 National Defense Authorization Act. We oppose the provocative military maneuvers by the US in the Asian Pacific region, specifically the unnecessary and intentionally aggressive actions in the disputed waters of the South China Sea. And we condemn the militarization of the waterways and maritime routes from Malaccan Singapore Strait to the South China Sea and East China Sea by the US state, meant to intimidate and threaten the Chinese state. We take the position that all disputes in the Asian Pacific region should be resolved by the nations of that region. My friends, we are living in a moment of history that is extremely dangerous. The irreversible decline of the US and the anxiety that it is producing, along with the recklessness and mediocre character of the US decision makers, has produced a volatile situation that some argue is more dangerous than at any point during the Cold War period with the Soviet Union. Insane strategies like the concept of pre-launch interception, the theory that the US can launch a first strike to destroy the intercontinental ballistic missiles of Russia and China while they are still in their launchers, are now becoming accepted possibilities. US policymakers responded to questions from their European allies regarding the US commitment to NATO after the announcement of the so-called US pivot to Asia by saying that, quote, the European NATO powers should welcome the fact that the US is willing to engage in this new strategic challenge on behalf of the alliance. It is clear for those of us who must understand the white supremacist mentality because our lives depend on us understanding it, that the position voiced here is the acknowledgement of the common interest of the white West in maintaining global Western dominance. This is the collective imperialism that was committed to upholding white supremacist colonial power that Kwame Nkrumah talked about, that characterized US Western leadership coming out of the Second World War. This is the mad psychopathology of white supremacy. They are preparing for war, a winnable war with the Chinese. And what has been the response from the Chinese? They said that they will vigorously oppose the deployment of new weapon systems in the Asia-Pacific region. In just 2 months, US public opinion has hardened against the Chinese with veiled racial coding from Donald Trump, Joe Biden, the corporate press, suggesting and impeding an inevitable conflict on the horizon. Today, the language is being coded, but its intent to shore up the common interests of the pan-European colonial capitalist white supremacist project is absolutely clear. That is why we say in the Black Alliance for Peace that we must name the pan-European white supremacist colonial capitalist patriarchy as the existential threat to all of humanity. Our task must be to take away the power that they have to destroy the world. This is the historic imperative. Whether we can do that will determine if we live or die.